It's central to why this approach works. Every hour you spend rereading old texts or refreshing his social media is an hour reinforcing the belief that your peace depends on his behavior. Every hour you spend instead on your own goals, your own friendships, your own growth reinforces the opposite belief, which is that your life is full and stable, independent of him. Avoidant partners can sense this shift, not because they're reading your mind, but because people who've built a full life carry themselves differently, they text differently, they show up differently, there's less desperation in the energy. And desperation, even well disguised, is one of the fastest ways to trigger an avoidant partner's retreat. I also want you to give yourself permission to grieve the version of the relationship you wish you already had. A lot of women stay stuck in the anxious chasing pattern because slowing down means facing the reality that this relationship right now isn't what they hoped it would be. That's a real loss, and it deserves to be felt, not bypassed. But feeling that loss honestly is what allows you to stop performing a version of okay that you don't actually feel, which, as we talked about earlier, avoidant partners tend to sense anyway. I know this is hard to hear if you've spent months or years in this pattern, believing that if you just tried a little harder, loved a little more visibly, explained your feelings a little more clearly, he would finally understand and change. But an avoidant partner doesn't need more explanation from you. He needs less pressure. And the two of those often feel like opposites, but they aren't. You can be deeply present, deeply caring, and deeply honest about your needs without turning every moment of distance into an emergency that needs immediate repair. This is the real shift behind loving an avoidant person, well, if that's the path you choose. It isn't about becoming someone who doesn't care. It's about becoming someone whose care doesn't collapse into anxiety the moment he needs a little room to breathe. That distinction is everything. I want to leave you with one more thing before we close this out. This pattern, the anxious pursuit meeting avoidant withdrawal, isn't a personal flaw. It isn't proof that you're too much or too needy or too broken to be loved properly. It's a learned response built from your own history, just like his avoidance was built from his. The difference is you have the ability to notice it, name it, and change it. He may never do that work, but you can. And when you do, you stop being at the mercy of his pulling away because your sense of safety stops depending on his consistency. Give this shift real time. Don't expect it to change everything overnight. Nervous systems, yours and his, take weeks, sometimes months, to recalibrate around a new pattern. But if you commit to this one change, if you stop being the one who always initiates the repair, you'll start to see him show up in ways that feel less like effort and more like genuine desire. That's the difference between being chosen out of pressure and being chosen out of real, unforced feeling. And that difference is worth every uncomfortable moment it takes to get there. If you're reading this, chances are you're worn out. You've lain awake replaying conversations, watching their texts get shorter and cooler and further apart, hunting for some kind of proof that you actually matter to them. If you're reading this, chances are you're worn out. You've lain awake replaying conversations, watching their texts get shorter and cooler and further apart, hunting for some kind of proof that you actually matter to them. You keep waiting for that movie moment, the one where everything suddenly makes sense and they finally admit you're it. But here's the uncomfortable possibility. Maybe that moment already happened and you didn't recognize it because it didn't look like affection. It looked like anxiety. It looked like a fight that came out of nowhere. Most advice about relationships tells you to watch for steadiness, to trust that real love feels calm and dependable. That's true if you're dealing with someone securely attached. You're not. You're tangled up with someone avoidant, and for them, the usual rules run backwards. Safety feels threatening, and closeness feels like being trapped. There's a particular turning point that shows up in almost every serious relationship with an avoidant person, and it's the point where they genuinely start falling for you. Ironically, it's often the exact moment their partner assumes things are falling apart. That's because avoidant people don't fall in love the way everyone else does. They don't soften or open up. They short-circuit. Stay with me here, because what I'm about to describe is going to run against everything your gut is telling you. We're going to look at behavior that reads as rejection, but is actually a distress signal from someone whose attachment system just got triggered. We're going to talk about why they pull away right when they realize they're in too deep. It isn't you they're escaping. It's the version of themselves that's starting to depend on you and that terrifies them. To make sense of this, you have to understand how they built their inner world in the first place. For someone with a dismissive avoidant style, self-sufficiency isn't just something they prefer, it's how they've learned to survive emotionally. Somewhere early on, they absorbed the lesson that needing people is risky, that missing someone is basically confessing a weakness. So they built an internal fortress, tightly guarded, nothing getting in, and just as importantly, nothing real getting out. That's the emotional baseline they operate from. Then you arrive. In the beginning, it's effortless because the early stage of a relationship doesn't ask much of them. It's excitement and chemistry, not depth. They can play the part of a great partner because you haven't reached anything underneath yet. You're still a visitor, not someone who actually lives inside their walls. But then time does what time does. You start sharing real things. You build memories together. You stop being a novelty and start becoming something they rely on for comfort. And that's exactly when things shift. You're no longer just someone they're seeing. In their nervous system, you've become a threat to the balance they've spent years protecting. You've gotten past the walls. The first thing you'll usually notice isn't distance. Oddly enough, it's friction. They get irritable over nothing. Suddenly your habits annoy them, how you talk, how you dress, small things that never bothered them before. It's easy to read this as them losing interest, but look closer. This is a defense mechanism, not boredom. They're unconsciously trying to talk themselves out of how much you mean to them. Here's the logic underneath it. If you're wonderful, if you're everything they wanted, then losing you would be devastating. And their brain, wired for self-protection, won't tolerate that kind of exposure. So they start finding flaws, real or invented, to convince themselves you're not actually that important. It's not cruelty, it's self-defense dressed up as criticism. They're not trying to hurt you, they're trying to protect themselves from how much they've come to value you. And this is the key thing to understand. They aren't creating distance because they want you gone. They're testing whether the connection can survive the strain, or trying to control the ending on their own terms before you can hurt them first. Breaking things themselves feels safer than being broken later. That leads to a second, quieter layer of this shift, the shutdown. Think about a time you had a genuinely intimate moment with them. Maybe they opened up about something painful, or you shared a moment of real, unguarded closeness. You probably felt like you'd finally broken through. Then the next day they vanish. No texts, no calls, or if they do respond, it's flat and distant. For you, that closeness felt like connection. For them, it felt like exposure. The morning after real vulnerability, their internal alarms are going off. They feel unprotected, like they showed too much, and their instinct is to retreat and rebuild the walls you just got past. That silence is brutal to sit with. It can feel like punishment, or like you were manipulated. But that silence isn't empty. It's loaded. It's them wrestling with an emotion they don't have language for. The fear of actually needing someone again after years of avoiding exactly that. If they genuinely didn't care, they wouldn't need to disappear at all. They'd just be casually unaffected. The size of their withdrawal tells you the size of what they felt. Bigger love triggers bigger fear, and bigger fear creates bigger distance. So when you see them retreat right after a moment of closeness, resist the urge to chase. Chasing someone in that state is like running after a startled animal. It only confirms their fear that you're going to overwhelm them. Instead, the move is to stay steady, to become the stable point they can return to. Now, the fearful avoidant version of this plays out differently. Where the dismissive type retreats into detachment and logic, the fearful type, sometimes called disorganized attachment, spirals into chaos instead. They actually want closeness, but it scares them just as much as it draws them in. So they pull you close, then push you away in the same breath. When a fearful avoidant starts genuinely falling for you, they tend to start testing you, often through manufactured conflict. These tests aren't fair, and they're not meant to be passed. They might accuse you of something with zero evidence, invent reasons the relationship can't work, or insist that you deserve someone better than them. That line, "you deserve better," sounds selfless on the surface, like they're being humble or protective of you. But underneath, it's not humility at all. It's a plea for reassurance wearing the costume of a goodbye. They're essentially opening the exit door and hoping desperately that you'll refuse to walk through it. What they're really afraid of is that you'll eventually see the parts of themselves they've decided are unlovable. So they try to reveal that darkness early, on their own terms, to get the rejection over with before it can catch them by surprise. If you take the exit they offered, it confirms what they already believed about themselves, that they're broken and destined to be left. But if you stay and tell them plainly that you don't want someone better, you want them, something in that knot starts to loosen. Even so, it doesn't resolve neatly, because right after that kind of reassurance, something called the mirror effect tends to kick in. In any relationship, you naturally reflect your partner back to themselves. For someone avoidant, being with you highlights everything they feel they lack. Your warmth makes their guardedness more obvious. Your honesty makes their secrecy more obvious. Your steadiness makes their internal chaos more obvious. Every kind thing you do can end up making them feel worse about themselves, not better, because it reminds them how hard it is for them to give back the same thing. And the more you love them, the more shame that creates. And shame is corrosive to someone already fighting an avoidant pattern. To relieve that shame, they sometimes have to break the mirror altogether, pick a fight, find fault in you, create distance, anything to stop feeling their own limitations so clearly. That's often why things fall apart right when they seem to be going well. They'll suddenly zero in on your flaws, real or exaggerated, just to level the emotional playing field. If you're flawed too, their coldness feels less damning by comparison. It's not really about you being too sensitive or too much. It's a defense mechanism, and a sad one, because underneath all of that friction and distance is someone who deep down is waiting to see if anyone can weather the storm without walking away. They're not testing you to push you out for good. They're testing whether your love can hold up under pressure. Underneath it all, the real question they're asking without ever saying it out loud is simply, can you handle me? Can they handle the worst version of you? Because if they can't handle that, they can't handle the real you either. Now let's address something important. There's a real difference between an avoidant pulling away and someone being outright abusive. This isn't about tolerating disrespect or making excuses for someone who's actually mistreating you. The distinction comes down to intent and whether repair happens afterward. Someone narcissistic devalues you as a way to control you. Someone avoidant pulls away to protect themselves. A narcissist almost never takes responsibility for their behavior. An avoidant person, once the storm settles, usually feels real guilt, even if they can't put it into words. You'll catch it in small gestures, a check-in text, a random meme after 3 days of silence. That meme isn't just a meme, it's a quiet white flag. Their way of saying, I'm still here, are you? It's a small olive branch sent up from somewhere deep underground. So how do you tell the difference between someone who's genuinely gone and someone who's just circling back slowly? Watch the pattern. If someone is consistently indifferent, that's not avoidance, that's just disinterest. Plain and simple dot. But if they swing between intense and distant, if they pull you close and then panic and retreat, that's the knot we've been talking about. And that back and forth actually tells you something important. There's a real fight happening internally because you matter to them. If you didn't matter, there'd be no struggle at all. They'd simply leave. No drama, no static. The fact that they're still around, even while acting distant or defensive, is itself evidence of the bond. They're stuck in the doorway, too afraid to fully step in, too attached to walk away. That in-between space is where a lot of you reading this are currently living. It's lonely, it's painful, but it's also where the real work actually happens. We've covered what this shift looks like, the withdrawal, the sudden coldness, the unexpected criticism, and how these often signal fear rather than a lack of feeling. But understanding that doesn't erase the hurt. Knowing they're scared doesn't make the quiet nights feel any less empty. So what do you actually do? How do you get through this shift without losing your own sense of self? And how do you support them without becoming collateral damage in their internal battle? This calls for a response that goes against every instinct you have. Your gut tells you to fix things when they pull back. You move closer. When they go quiet, you get louder. When they turn cold, you try to warm things up by giving even more. You need to stop doing that. I know that's hard to hear. You cannot thaw someone else's fear by burning yourself out. All that happens is you exhaust yourself while they stay just as guarded. This counterintuitive response is genuinely one of the hardest things to practice because it means overriding your natural urge to chase and repair. When you feel them pulling away, everything in you says, hold on tighter, explain yourself, make this okay. But in a dynamic shaped by avoidance, explaining reads as pressure, chasing reads as control, and reassurance can feel like a trap closing in. So the move is the opposite of instinct. When they step back, you don't follow, you hold your position. This isn't a manipulation tactic or some version of playing games. It's about respecting their need for space while still holding on to your own self-respect. Think of it as a secure pause. When the coldness or conflict or disappearing act starts, that's your cue to pause, not to pursue. You don't send the anxious text asking what's wrong. You don't write out a long explanation trying to decode their behavior. You don't apologize for things that weren't your fault just to smooth things over. You simply wait, and while waiting, you focus on calming your own system, because anxiety doesn't stay contained. If you're spiraling internally, checking your phone constantly, you're still chasing them, just without the words, and somehow that energy comes through anyway. Avoidant people tend to be extremely attuned to emotional undercurrents. They can sense when someone is anxiously waiting on them, and that sensed pressure often pushes them further away, because it starts to feel like an obligation rather than a connection. But when you genuinely redirect your energy elsewhere, spending time with friends, going to the gym, actually living your life rather than performing being okay, something in the dynamic shifts. The pressure eases, the vacuum that chasing created disappears, and in that open space, their natural curiosity about you has room to come back. Avoidant attachment tends to feel safest with a bit of distance. When you're constantly right there, they can only see the weight of what's expected of them. But when you step back into your own life, you become someone separate again, someone they can actually miss. And here's something rarely said out loud. Someone can't miss you if you never actually give them space to. You have to allow them to sit with the absence, to feel what silence actually costs. If they retreat and you immediately fill that silence with messages, you're removing any chance for them to feel the impact of pulling away. You're softening a consequence that was meant to teach them something. Let them sit with it instead. Let your warmth register as something valuable, not something automatic and always available like a utility bill. It's a gift, not an entitlement. And if they choose to walk away from it, that has weight. Now, I know the fear this brings up. If I stop reaching out, won't they just forget about me and move on? That fear is understandable, but it's not accurate. It's your own anxious wiring talking, not reality. They haven't forgotten you. People retain what's called object constancy. They still know you exist, even in the quiet. Actually, the moment you stop chasing is exactly when you become most real to them, because for the first time, you're behaving like someone secure. You're communicating that you have your own sense of worth. Avoidant people respect autonomy. They respect strength. Chasing makes you look uncertain of your value. Standing firm makes you look valuable, and that kind of value is naturally compelling. So let's talk about what typically happens next, their return. If you hold that secure pause long enough, they usually circle back. It might take a few days or a few weeks, but they'll come back testing the water. A short, low-effort message, "Hey, what's up?" Maybe just an emoji. This moment matters more than people realize, because most people mess it up right here. They're so relieved to hear from them that they respond instantly with a flood of emotion. "Oh my God, I was so worried. I missed you so much. Are we okay?" That single reaction hands all the power straight back. It shows them that no matter how they behave, you'll be there waiting. Don't do that. When they come back low effort, mirror their energy. If they say, "Hey, let a few hours pass," then respond with something warm but measured. "Hey, good to hear from you. How's everything going?" Friendly, not desperate. You're acting as the anchor here, and an anchor doesn't drift along behind the boat. It stays grounded. You're showing them that their absence didn't wreck you, and because it didn't, it becomes safe for them to come back without needing to fix anything first. That lowers their guard. But, and this matters a lot, you can't live in this cycle forever. There's a bigger picture to get to. Understanding why someone pulls away is compassion. Tolerating it indefinitely is self-neglect. At some point, knowing the reason behind the pain doesn't make the pain acceptable to keep absorbing. So how do you go from just surviving this pattern to actually healing it? You shift the relationship's terms through what's called secure vulnerability, very different from anxiously spilling emotions in the heat of the moment. Secure vulnerability means waiting for a calm, connected moment, not during a fight, not mid-withdrawal, and saying something like, "I really value what we have. When things are good between us, they're genuinely great. But when you go quiet for days with no word, it hurts me. I'm not asking you to change who you are, but I also can't feel good in a relationship where I feel shut out. I'd like us to find a way for you to have your space without me feeling abandoned. Can we work on that together?" Notice the shape of that. Acknowledgement first, then the specific behavior, then its impact, then your limit. Then an open invitation to problem solve, not blame, not accusation, just a clearly stated need treated as equally valid to their need for space. Their reaction here tells you everything. If they get defensive, call you needy, or shut the conversation down entirely, that's meaningful information. That's not just avoidance, that's an unwillingness to grow. But if they stay in the conversation, even uncomfortably, and say something like, "I don't really know how to do that, but I'm sorry," that's real progress. That means the relationship matters more to them than protecting their walls, and it means there's enough give in the pattern to actually work with. Still, patience is essential. This kind of attachment doesn't rewire in a single conversation. It takes repetition and reinforcement. When they open up or lean in, acknowledge it. "I love talking with you tonight. Thank you for sharing that with me. I feel really close to you right now." Positive reinforcement genuinely helps retrain the nervous system. They've learned that closeness leads to pain. Your job, patiently, is to show them that closeness can lead to safety instead. Understand the size of what you're up against. You're not just working against their current behavior, you're working against decades of conditioning, an absent parent, a critical one, an early betrayal. You're up against a long history you can't see, and you can't fight that history with frustration, only with steady consistency. Not consistency in chasing them, but consistency in simply being reliable. Think of yourself as a lighthouse. It doesn't run along the shoreline searching for ships. It stands still and keeps its light on. If a ship wants safety, it'll navigate toward the light. If it chooses the storm instead, that's not a failure of the lighthouse. You are not responsible for fixing them, only for creating a consistently safe, warm environment. If you've done that, and they still can't move closer, that's something happening within them, not a flaw in your effort. Let's go a bit deeper into why closeness can feel like panic for them in the first place. It comes down to a fear of losing themselves. For a dismissive avoidant, their sense of self functions like a heavily guarded island, built and reinforced over a lifetime. Real intimacy requires lowering those defenses, merging, in a sense. And that can feel less like connection and more like disappearing entirely. That's why their reaction can feel so extreme. It's not really about you, It's a survival response. They don't have a concept of healthy interdependence, only total self-sufficiency or total loss of self. And they often project that fear of losing themselves onto you, as if you're the one trying to consume them. So when you see them retreating, it helps to remind yourself they're not fighting against you, they're fighting for air. That shift in framing changes everything. It turns hurt into understanding, and understanding carries a calmer energy than resentment does, which they can actually feel. When the pressure eases, they can breathe again, and when they can breathe, they can move closer. There's another pattern worth naming here, what we might call the phantom ex. Often, right as they're pulling back, they'll bring up a past relationship out of nowhere, romanticizing it. She never needed this much from me. I still think about her sometimes. That kind of comment cuts deep and makes you feel like you're competing with someone. But here's what's actually happening. They're not in love with that person. They're in love with the safety of distance. An ex who's no longer present can't ask anything of them. That person becomes a controlled fantasy, not a real demand. You, on the other hand, are present, real, and asking for things, which feels far riskier. The phantom ex becomes a convenient shield. I can't fully commit because I'm not over her. It's rarely even true. It's more self-deception than honesty, using an absent memory to avoid dealing with someone actually in front of them. Don't try to compete with that memory. You'll lose, because memory never shows its bad side. Instead, gently name it. I understand you have history, and I'm not trying to erase that, but I'm here right now wanting to build something real with you. If you'd rather stay focused on the past, I can't make you choose differently, but you'd be missing what's actually available now. Then let the decision sit with them. Avoidant people resist feeling pressured, but they respond well to feeling like the choice is genuinely theirs. I want this with you, but only if you actually want to be here too.